Please welcome Steve Seleznow.
Thank you. Good evening. You know, I didn't plan to start my presentation this way, and I want to stick with the love theme, but Jonathan said something I just can't let pass. See, I wouldn't normally say this. I graduated from Harvard. And so his comments about my alma mater struck me. And I thought it would be important to share with you, since I've been in Arizona for 6 years, that at Harvard Square, my first experience there was seeing all the Harvard students wearing these T-shirts that said, Harvard, the ASU of the Northeast. So, in the interest of love, I will leave that with you, Jonathan. I'm going to try to set my conversation with you in the context of today. And on the title you see, you might not think I'd be talking about Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. But I think this national debate we're having about income inequality, 1%, 99%, whether we raise the minimum wage, as we see in some states, but not in others, when we talk about global trade and the global economy, when we talk about hedge funds and where did manufacturing go and how do we bring it back, and when we talk about immigration and jobs and the portability of labor these days, this whole issue of how business and philanthropy and social purpose, how they come together, I think, is really important. And I ask you to think about that as the context for what I want to talk about. So when we think about business, business is typically established, as all you know in the business school, to maximize profit, to create return for shareholders, to create equity, to build market capitalization, to make sure that the financial performance of the corporation is optimized and maximized in every way. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And corporate social responsibility has been really an add-on to the core purpose. In fact, it's been adjacent. And it is often an investment that companies make when the maximization of profits is best, not always, but it will often get cut when those profits are not where they need to be and expenses have to be trimmed. But it is an enhancer. And sometimes it's a necessary evil. For example, in international trade, if you want to build a mine in a foreign country, to get that president or prime minister or the heads of the economy to agree, you've got to agree to build schools and soccer fields and roads and all kinds of wonderful things for the community, not because you want to necessarily create that for the community. That's not your business. But to do business, you have to do that. Now that creates social good, but it has other factors associated with it other than that being the core of what that corporation is about. Now, my argument to you will be, is social responsibility as an adjacent value to the company as effective as if it were a core value of the company? And so now I want to talk about philanthropy, because in fact, philanthropy is the outgrowth of corporate success. You would not have the philanthropy we have in this nation if founders of major companies didn't, after they've made enormous success, decide personally and in their families to take the wealth they earned from their companies and reinvest it in the community. And that's been a wonderful thing. The Carnegies, the Fords, the Rockefellers, the Gateses, the Zuckerbergs. Those are all examples of that model. But I'll get back to the Zuckerbergs in a few minutes. So, philanthropy, interestingly, has been the end result of corporate success. And it has made billions in investment in this country and certainly around the world. And we have all benefited from it. And so you can make a very clear argument that corporate success, whether corporate social responsibility is part of the core mission of the corporation, whether it is or not, you could argue that it's irrelevant. Because at the end of the day, if those people who found these very successful companies take their wealth and give it back to the community in huge numbers, doesn't that justify the fact that corporations are set up to maximize profits? And I would argue that in many ways it does. But today, is it enough? So let's talk about purpose. So what that value chain is that we see is that a corporation is successful, a founder generates wealth, the founder takes that wealth and invests it in social purpose. So let's think of social purpose as nonprofits. So corporations make money, founders become wealthy, founders take that wealth and reinvest it in the community. In many things, very different than what the company did. Who could argue with that point of view? Why would you? When you look at the millions and millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars, that go into the economy and into the nonprofit sector. And in fact, in Arizona, over the years, the nonprofit sector has become the 5th largest contributor to economic development in the state of Arizona. And most of that money is coming from foundations, like mine and others. So it's a really beautiful model, and it has worked extraordinarily well. And it has been a great way to transfer wealth from companies to individuals, then back to communities. I used to work for Bill Gates, and he called himself a recycler. He recycled the profits from Microsoft into a $35 billion foundation, and he leveraged another very successful business leader, Warren Buffett, to put $35 billion in, and there's a $70 billion foundation sitting in Seattle doing great things across the world. I think that's wonderful. I think that's great, but I will argue, is it enough? And could we have an even greater impact if we start to run to the intersection, start to push these 3 spheres that I just showed you together? So what we've had, business leads to philanthropy, leads to social purpose, and leads to investment in the nonprofit community. All wonderful things. But things are changing rapidly in the world. And the great thing about today's businesses and today's entrepreneurs is they are thinking about ways not only to create businesses that disrupt the usual way of doing business, but those ideas and tools are finding their way into the purpose sector, the nonprofit sector. And if we think about the value of technology and entrepreneurship, how does that then transfer into the nonprofit sector and have the same disruptive influence it's having in the corporate sector? And then where does the social value come from that particular intersection? Now, when it comes to business and purpose, there are some dangers here. So I don't want to sound too altruistic, and I'll tell you a story. So Microsoft sold hundreds of millions of dollars in technology to Shell Oil Company, as they've sold to other companies. And the Gates Foundation, in its enormous endowment, had very, very strong investments in Shell Oil. If you're trying to maximize your endowment as a philanthropy, you want a great portfolio to manage his $35 billion. Warren, of course, managed his own $35 billion and just sent a check for $1.6 billion every year to the Gates Foundation. That's how that worked. Many at the foundation wanted Warren to manage the foundation's assets, but that didn't happen. So they're managed separately. So here the Gates Foundation has very, very large holdings in Shell Oil. And the Gates Foundation is focused on trying to end disease in Africa as one of the strategic intents of the foundation. And in Nigeria, we were spending tens of millions of dollars investing in ways to cure chronic respiratory disease in that country. And lots of that money was going to a particular community that was situated right outside the fence of a Shell oil refinery. So on the one hand, the foundation is invested in Shell. On the other hand, the foundation is invested in Shell, and on the other hand, we're making grants to that very community that is suffering from the pollution of that refinery in Nigeria. Now that's a moral hazard of great proportion and a moral dilemma. If your aim is to maximize the foundation's assets, then you should be in Shell Oil. But if Shell Oil is creating the very diseases you want to rid the earth of, how do you deal with that problem? Now, the Los Angeles Times learned about it, and they ran a series for 5 days. Bill Gates can get very angry. But he also had to face this moral decision. And he made, in my view, the right decision. They divested of Shell Oil in the Gates Foundation portfolio. When they're not core, these kinds of things can happen. When they're adjacent, these kinds of things can happen. Now, there are lots of companies that are focusing on that centerpiece of that intersection. And you see many brands you may know up here, and you may be very familiar with them. These are called B Corps, benefit corporations. Many of you are in business school. You certainly know what these corporate structures are. But they're not just judged on their financial performance, and they may create enormous wealth for their founders, but the core structure of the company is to create financial performance and public benefit. There is an equivalence between the two. So the core social values the company holds and the core business values go hand in hand. And one company up there is a local company, Goodman's Interior Structure is rooted in good. And their company is devoted to community investment and making sure all their products are sustainable and they have zero waste. And so we have many great companies here with the same point of view. Now, there's another company type. These are supply chain innovators. You might have studied them. I'll get to Chipotle last. Starbucks has created markets in their supply chains, so very poor coffee growers can be part of a larger global market. And through that program, they've changed the quality of life in the communities where those coffee growers live. They've created enormous increases in income and in wealth in those communities, and it's changing the way of life in very distressed and poor communities. Unilever has built a sustainability plan for all of their projects and everything they do, and that, you know, is a gigantic company. And Chipotle, before E. coli, said, what is food with integrity? and instead of guac, you got E. coli. So there is also a danger in being a company that combines the two, in that when your core belief in social good faces a crisis, the challenge to you could be even greater than if your business purposes and your social purposes were not one and the same. So it hurt Chipotle, who had a great combination of business and social purpose, but their integrity got challenged, and got challenged at a great degree because it was so much a part of the company. So it's not to say that there aren't dangers when you combine the two. There are absolutely risks, and sometimes those risks are even higher. And then there's another form of company called the product and service innovations. And many of you know these brands and you love these brands and they make you feel good. Bombas, if you don't know, they're a sock manufacturer. For every pair of socks they make, and they're really good socks, they give one pair to homeless people. Now, you've got to understand, socks are incredibly valuable if you're homeless. So for every one they manufacture and sell, they donate a pair. We know Tom's and their shoes. We know Warby Parker and their eyeglasses. You may not know Figs. Figs makes medical scrubs. So for every pair of medical scrubs they create, they donate one in a distressed part of the world, so healthcare can have them. Now you might be saying, Airbnb, what on earth are they doing up there? Well, you might not know they have a chief disaster officer. So when there is a flood or a hurricane or a terrorist attack, Airbnb in those areas asks all of their hosts to allow people to stay for free, and it's amazing what people do. So they create that opportunity in times of distress. So these companies really get the combination of the financial imperatives they face and the social imperatives they face, and they bring them together and they run to the intersection. And so there are great things that these companies are teaching us, and great lessons to be learned from all of them. And so I want to talk next about philanthropy and purpose. Oh, before we get to that, these companies have taught us these things. Now, this is based on research from a lot of these companies, and what have they learned about the value of making social purpose a key part of their business purpose. And as I think many of you know, more and more consumers are demanding social responsibility from their companies. This national public debate is in some ways connected to this. People want to work at a socially responsible company, and I would say my foundation is one of those, and it is really attractive to people who want to work in a place that gives away money every day for great things in the community. They feel better when they're at work in these companies. These companies can create new markets never thought of before. And at the end of the day, they find it's a moral imperative to do this in the 21st century. So I should stop for a minute, since I mentioned who I used to work for. I started as a teacher in 1975, became a principal, and I have this unique distinction of having run the best large school system in America and the worst large school system in America. And after those experiences, I went to a group called Venture Philanthropy Partners in Washington, D.C., which was created by 3 entrepreneurs in technology who made billions of dollars. And they created this philanthropy to take from their experience with venture capitalists the process and protocols and procedures and ways of doing business of venture capital organizations, and use that same model in investment in nonprofits, and to bring that same rigor, that same intensity, and that same amount of money to those nonprofits. I then went to the Gates Foundation, where I was in charge of implementing the Gates Foundation strategy across the United States in education. And then I came here to Arizona to lead the Arizona Community Foundation. Now, we this past year made $56 million in investments in nonprofits across the state and around the globe. We are everywhere from every part of Arizona to the Middle East, to South Sudan, to almost every state in the country, because most Arizonans are from somewhere else, and they give their money all over the place. And we're happy to help them do it. And we manage some $800 million in assets, in charitable assets here. And so I had to say, from looking at all these things and these experiences, what is it that we could do here in Arizona that could help facilitate, through the funding we do and the shaping and influencing we do with so much money, what could we do to move this idea of connecting philanthropy, business, and social purpose? And in fact, we rely on business all the time. Our endowment is invested in the markets. It's in mutual funds and stocks and bonds and private equities, in hedge funds and distressed real estate, all kinds of things. Those are all businesses, smaller scale than the Gates Foundation, but very similar. So we could not do the work we do and preserve our endowments and grow our endowments unless we had great businesses to invest in. So business is critical to us and critical to our sustainability. So when we start thinking about how could we engage in philanthropy with the for-profit world, the default response in foundations is, oh, we don't touch for-profits. Well, I've just argued we wouldn't even exist if there were not for-profits. In fact, of the 1,700 donors who create charitable funds at the Arizona Community Foundation, most of them were entrepreneurs, made their wealth in Arizona, built companies, were successful business executives. They created charitable funds to give back to the community the wealth they earned from their businesses. So we wouldn't exist if they didn't run successful businesses. But could we do more together if we were more intentional? We all care about social purpose, and we really do need to rely on each other, not just for our investments, not just for those charitable funds, but to do good in the community. For example, we do an innovation prize in water to try to raise consciousness and improve our water future here. Who do we partner with? Republic Media, for-profit company. Why do we partner with them? We could not move that agenda alone. We could put the money up for a $100,000 prize or a $250,000 prize, which we're doing now, but how would we amplify it? How could we get the community to focus on? Well, by working with a for-profit company that has a set of skills that we don't have, we can create greater leverage in the community, and we can advance a social agenda with a for-profit company. So it's not just the business side or the creation of wealth that moves into philanthropy. It's the actual act of giving and leveraging that giving for a social purpose where philanthropy and business needs to come together and make that a core part of their agendas. So this intersection between the two is really important. Now, there are some people who really get this and some companies who really get this. And I want to talk about a few of them because I think it's going to lead to something really fascinating here. Many of you have heard of Mark Benioff, the head of Salesforce. Do you know that Salesforce has this 1-1-1 program? They take 1% of their equity, 1% of their products, 1% of their employees' time, and they devote it to a social purpose. Now, a company as large as Salesforce, that's a lot of time, that's a lot of equity, that's a lot of impact. And they are influencing a lot of others, including people here. Now, there's another company I want to talk about. That one right there. I told you I'd come back to Mark Zuckerberg. So you might have heard that he and his wife, Priscilla Chan, started something very new. And I don't think many people nationally or internationally understood how significant this is. The Zuckerberg said, we don't want to create a philanthropic industrial complex like the Gates Foundation with great buildings in Seattle and 8 offices around the planet. We want to do something different. So we're going to create the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is a new way of thinking about business and philanthropy, never seen at this scale. So Mark and his wife have pledged $45 billion. Now, Melinda and Bill, just in a sense of comparison, $28 billion when they first started, it's grown to 35. Warren Buffett, 35. Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, $45 billion to their initiative. That will bring business, investment in for-profits, investment in social innovation, advocacy and lobbying under one house, which you can't do with philanthropy now. They are optimizing all that business does and all that philanthropy does for a social purpose. They want to invest in companies that are going to invent new technologies to make our lives better and make the developing world a better place to live. That's how they see it. So let's move on. These 2 ideas generated some entrepreneurs right here in Arizona who've been very successful and who embrace these concepts to say, look, could we create a foundation here that is this next generation of business, of philanthropy, and of purpose all in one? Could a philanthropy with charitable dollars that get IRS tax deductions invest in for-profit startup companies? Well, what do you think all of us in the philanthropic world said? Oh, hell no. We can't touch for-profits. We can't do that. Well, we try to not accept the idea of can't and not accept the idea of no and we don't even like the word maybe. So some great entrepreneurs here, Mario Martinez, Brandon Clark, Brad Jananga, and Heidi Jananga came to us and said, we have this vision. And we said, because we were looking for words, we all wanted to say no, maybe, and we can't. And we said, okay, let's figure it out. Let's try to find a way to do this. And this idea, if you allow yourself to think about it, if you allow yourself to think beyond the barriers that obstructed business for years before these ideas of bringing core values together, of social purpose, of business, this idea of bringing now all 3, philanthropy, business, and social purpose together, was in their vision. And we said, okay, let's figure out how we do this. And so this is what we came up with, and this is what we're doing now here in Arizona to bring business, philanthropy, and social purpose together. You might not be able to see that very well, but here's how it works. We've created a foundation and a board of advisors of startup entrepreneurs and those who were startup entrepreneurs that have now been very successful, including those I mentioned. And this is a charitable fund. Anybody who gives to this fund, I'm not making an ask, I promise, but you can if you want. Everyone who gives to that fund that we manage at the Community Foundation will get a charitable deduction. And it's legal. Now, remember I told you the Arizona Community Foundation and the Gates Foundation and all others invest their assets in the market. We're in all kinds of companies that do all kinds of things. And we said, well, what if instead of putting it in our traditional investment pools, we took those funds and invested them as an investment strategy that is purely going to start up companies? What's different than, or riskier, than investing in a hedge fund, or distressed real estate, or just the stock market these days? Well, it is risky, we know. And every donor that would give to this fund and would get a charitable deduction knows that their assets in that fund will be high risk because it's going to startups, but it will all go to startups. And those startups will come to the fund, and that fund will partner with angel investors and venture capital and private equity as partners in those investments. Now, nobody will financially benefit. All the money from the successful startups that emerge here in Arizona as a result of this investment get poured right back into the fund. Just the return from investment, just like in our other investment pools. But then what happens? If you are an early stage company that this fund invests in, you've got to agree to do the 1% deal that Salesforce does. You've got to agree to get this money that you'll commit to the 1%. Now, then that foundation will take the proceeds every year, a portion of them, as most endowed funds do, and invest them in social entrepreneurs, scholarships, training programs that support the startup sector, support things like SeedSpot that I'm sure many of you know, and will be used to produce social good. And that's the way we solve this particular problem. And this exists here in Arizona. There are several 100,000 in the fund already. The fund is growing. And I think over time this will add to the ecosystem of the startup community here. But what is the beauty of this? The beauty of this is that there is a way, if you are intentional and you are willful, to bring business, philanthropy, and social purpose all together to leverage the assets that all bring to the table to improve the condition of the community and to create great things. So I would say to all of you, run to the intersection. Thank you very much.